Hello, and day two of The Boy Who Made the World Disappear. I'm going to start with chapter 3. Okay. As soon as Harrison was safely inside his bedroom, he set to work. First, he tested what would happen when he let go of the balloon string. Cautiously, he untied the knot round his wrist. Instead of floating up to the ceiling like a normal helium balloon would do, it hovered mysteriously in midair. Harrison was tempted to poke it with his finger, but Shelley's warning not to touch it rang in his ears. If it really could swallow a medium-sized border collie, what could it do with him? He walked around the balloon so he could look at it from every possible angle. He crouched down and gazed up at it, and stood up on tiptoe, peering down. It looked exactly the same from every direction. A flat black circle, like a piece of black card, had been cut out and stuck in midair. It wasn't round like a balloon should be. He noticed it didn't have a knot either. Whenever he got the balloon from a fair or a party, there was always a knot at the bottom where the string was attached. But this thing, whatever it was, didn't have one. Instead, the string just sort of vanished into the blackness. Harrison was starting to have an idea of what his balloon might really be. He closed his bedroom curtains, switched on his torch and turned out the lights. He swished the beam around in the darkness until he found the balloon, which was when he noticed the oddest thing. Instead of reflecting off the surface, the torch beam seemed to disappear right into it. Harrison shone the torch onto a bowling ball sitting on his shelf so he could compare the two. But that looked round and shiny and, quite frankly, like a ball. Not flat and completely black. Harrison turned the light back on and then crawled under his bed, rummaging around until he found the toy he was looking for, a fluffy grey elephant called Elmond. He and Elmond had never really got on, mainly because his fur was made of rough nylon fibre which triggered Harrison's eczema. Elmond would be the perfect test subject. Harrison took a deep breath and balanced Elmond on his right hand, and if he was throwing a spear, as if he was throwing a spear. He took careful aim, putting all his focus on his target, and launched the elephant into the air. Elmond floated gracefully past the posters of stars and planets on Harrison's bedroom wall and splattered against the sides of the balloon. Now, you might think that being struck by a fast-moving, fluffy elephant would have sent the balloon flying. But, oh no, it remained rock steady. And that wasn't the most curious thing, because the instant Elmond struck the balloon, the fluffy elephant seemed to freeze in time. Then, slowly, it started to fade until it became completely see-through. Harrison was sure that he saw the toy's eyes widen in shock before it disappeared completely. That proved it, just as Harrison had suspected. This was no ordinary balloon. This was a black hole. That night at supper, Harrison had the opportunity to conduct further tests. True to form, his parents were trying to make him eat vegetables by giving him broccoli to go with his cottage pie. Even though he'd tried broccoli 3 times and most definitely didn't like it. Even worse, one of the boys in his class had told him that eating too much broccoli turned your hair green, and he didn't really want that. Harrison, remember the rules, his mother said. Eat all of your vegetables or no pudding. I don't want the broccoli, Harrison told her. It tastes like trees. Don't be silly. You love broccoli, said his father. Just try it, suggested his mother. I have tried it, replied Harrison, 3 times. Well, try it again, said his father. Harrison felt his temper rising. What if the boy at school was right? If he went to school with green hair, everyone would laugh at him. Just the thought of it made his eyes sting with tears. Why were they forcing him to eat something so horrible? He wanted to lash out, scream, and shout. He was just about to pick his plate up and fling it across the room when an idea struck him. What if he didn't? What if, instead of losing his temper, he used his black hole? Okay, he said innocently, I suppose I can try it again. And instead of growling and grinding his teeth, he broke out into the broadest of smiles. His parents looked confused at the sudden turnaround, but also relieved. At least their son wasn't going to have another code red. Harrison picked up his fork and took a bite of his cottage pie. Then, while his parents weren't paying attention and his sister Lana shoveled up her own vegetables like they were the most delicious thing on earth, he slowly, slyly took hold of the string and manoeuvred the black hole under the table where no one could see it. Of course, he was very careful not to touch it. After all, he didn't want to fall into it like poor Elmond. After double-checking his parents weren't looking, he picked up a particularly unappetizing piece of broccoli from his plate and dropped it onto the black hole. The effect was remarkable. Just as with Elmond, the moment it struck the black hole, the broccoli appeared to freeze in time. Then, after a few seconds, it slowly faded until finally it was completely gone. Harrison couldn't believe his luck. This was great. No more awful, disgusting vegetables. One after another, he snuck the pieces of broccoli off his plate and threw them at the black hole, waiting for each to fade from view before disposing of another, until piece by piece he removed every bit of broccoli from his plate. "Goodness me," said his father with delight. "Every bit of broccoli gone. Well done, Harrison. You've definitely earned your dessert." Harrison felt a twinge of guilt, but that quickly vanished with his first mouthful of chocolate pudding. He raised the black hole up above the table again so that he could look at it. He thought, this might come in handy. After all, there are one or two things he wouldn't mind getting rid of. Hector Broom's elastic band, for example. The next day was a school day, and Harrison's alarm woke him with a start. Beep, beep, beep. For an awful moment, he wondered whether the black hole might have been a dream. But, to his great relief, when he sat up and opened his eyes, there it was, tied to the bottom of the bed, exactly where he had left it. Was it smaller than it might have been the night before? Or was he imagining things? All balloons shrink a bit overnight, he reassured himself. Maybe black holes were no different. Either way, today he was going to have some fun. Beep, beep, beep. He picked up his alarm clock from his bedside table and launched it through the air. Beep, beep, beow. The clock had an irritating smiley face sun on it, and Harrison watched with satisfaction as it faded from view. Oh yes, this was going to be a great day. It was their father's turn to walk Harrison and Lana down the hill to school. Luckily, he was so busy doing whatever it was that grown-ups do on their phones that he didn't notice Harrison had brought his black hole. He also didn't notice when Harrison took his reading book from his satchel and threw it over his shoulder. And he most definitely didn't notice that the self-same reading book froze at the surface of the black hole and slowly faded from view. Ha, thought Harrison, no one will know. I didn't do my reading homework. Harrison smiled to himself. His black hole was primed and ready for action. So they reached the bottom of the hill, where a crowd of parents and school children were hovering near Shelley's grandmother, the school lollipop lady. Now, I need to give you a bit of background on Shelley's grandmother. As I've already mentioned, she was the school lollipop lady, meaning she helped all the children and parents cross the busy road outside the school. Secondly, she was known to be slightly strange. Very few cars came through the village, so you might think she would be constantly leading children across the road. But that wasn't how she operated at all. Instead, every morning she would wait with a lollipop until a large crowd had gathered round her. The road would be empty, without a car to be seen. But would she cross? Oh no, she would wait and wait. Then, as soon as she saw a car coming, she would inch her way into the middle of the road, plant her pole and blow her whistle. Once there was a large gap between cars, one of the fathers had grown impatient, taken his children by the hand and started to cross the road without her permission. Beep! He stopped in her tracks. There's nothing coming, he exclaimed. Beep! Went Shelley's grandmother's whistle, but beep! Beep! Luckily, at that moment, an elderly cyclist had hootled into view, so Shelley's grandmother was able to voyage to the middle of the road, plant her pole, and let everyone cross. Usually, the lollipop lady wasn't one for conversation. So Harry was very surprised when she smiled and as he approached and put a friendly hand on her shoulder. Ah, you must be Harrison, she said, with a twinkle in her eye. What did you think of Hector's birthday party? It was okay, said Harrison, but I had an argument with your granddaughter. She wasn't very nice to me. Ah, is that so? Did she give you that balloon? She asked innocently, pointing at the black hole. It's a very unusual colour. Yes, replied Harrison carefully. Could Shelley's grandmother know the truth about the balloon? Have you put anything in it yet? Whispered Shelley's grandmother, leaning in close so no one else could hear. So she did know, which meant that Shelley must have intentionally given her the black hole. But why? Harrison checked to see if his father was listening, but he seemed to be busy chatting away on his phone. Only Elman the elephant and some broccoli, whispered Harrison. And my alarm clock. Oh, and my reading book. Your secret's safe with me, said Shelley's grandmother, tapping her nose. But be careful, when she puts something in there, it can never come out. That's okay, said Harrison. I don't want that stuff back. Are you a witch? Interrupted Lana. It was a bit rude, but Harrison knew what she meant. The lollipop lady didn't have warts or a cloak or a black cat, but there was something ever so slightly unusual about her. Maybe it was her sharp green eyes. Quite the opposite, my dear, Shelley's grandmother said. I'm training to become an astronomer. Both Lana and Harrison looked impressed. Like Shelley? Asked Harrison. Very like Shelley. In fact, exactly like Shelley, said Shelley's grandmother, chuckling. And this must be your father. Their father, who was still busy on his phone, nodded hello. Or, of course, it could be you, Harrison, said Shelley's grandmother. Only older. Me? Asked Harrison. Have you never thought, replied the old woman, that if you want to know what you will look like when you grow up, you should look at your parents? Harrison hadn't. Or your grandparents, added Shelley's grandmother, rather mischievously. Then, seeing that Harrison's father was still on his phone and not really listening, she said in a low voice, You must keep feeding it, you know. Feeding it? Asked Harrison, in the quietest voice he could manage. Or it will shrink to nothing. That's the thing about black holes, said Shelley's grandmother. Always hungry. I'm hungry, said Lana. I want some cake. No one's having any cake, said Harrison's father, ending his call. You've only just had breakfast. And besides, Harrison's got swimming. Swimming? Harrison had completely forgotten Monday was swimming day, which reminds me, there's something else I need to tell you about Harrison. He wasn't in any way a scaredy cat, but like most people, there were some things that he didn't like at all. You might be scared of spiders or dentists or mouldy grapes, for example. But Harrison, well, for Harrison, it was swimming. It all started with his very first lesson. His father had taken him to the local pool where a large, round-faced man with curly hair told him that he was his new swimming instructor and would have him waterborne in no time. Let's see what you can do, Harrison, said the instructor as he removed Harrison's armband. I can sink, said Harrison, but that's about it. Swimming is all in the mind, the instructor told him. If you think you can't do it, you can't. If you think you can, he smiled a knowing smile. You might surprise yourself. What if I surprise myself by drowning? Harrison had asked. You won't drown, the instructor had said with a chuckle. I'll be right here the whole time. Of course. What the curly-haired instructor hadn't known when he'd said that was that there would be a lady instructor in the pool that morning, and the two of them would really enjoy chatting. In fact, they would enjoy chatting so much that when Harrison did need help and began to splutter and swallow and sink beneath the water, the curly-haired swimming instructor would completely fail to notice. It was only when Harrison tugged at the curly-haired instructor's shorts to get his attention, accidentally pulling them down, that the man finally realised what was happening. Even then, he seemed to be crosser that the lady instructor saw his bottom than sorry that Harrison had nearly drowned. Ever since, Harrison had a huge fear of water. So when Harrison's father mentioned swimming, I think you can guess what happened. Harrison started to lose it. No, he exclaimed, throwing his school bag onto the pavement. I'm not going. Harrison, said his father patiently, you can't keep doing this week after week. Everyone has to learn to swim. Haven't got my swimming kit, said Harrison. Oh, that's all right, his father said. I'm sure the school will have some spare shorts. The spares are too big, exclaimed Harrison. They soak up loads of water and drag me under, and I'll drown. Enough, Harrison, said his father in a firm voice. You're going swimming, and that's final. Ugh, groaned Harrison. It's not fair. And with that, he lowered his head, furrowed his brow, narrowed his eyes, and ground his teeth. Uh-oh, said Harrison's father. Code red. Don't say that, shouted Harrison. I hate it when you say that. The crowd around them began to move back. Ugh! Cried Harrison, kicking his legs. Over to you, said Shelley's grandmother to Harrison's father with a grin. Duty calls. Sure enough, putting up the road was a very old man on a tiny electric scooter. Shelley's grandmother inched forward onto the tarmac and planted her lollipop pole, forcing him to screech to a halt. The waiting crowd surged around the road and in through the school gates. Harrison, come on, we'll be late, said his father. I'm not going swimming, roared Harrison, and you can't make me. 45 minutes later, in a deeply upsetting turn of events, Harrison found himself sitting on a wooden bench in the boys' changing room, wearing a very large pair of grey swimming trunks from the spares box. Harrison, are you still in there? Called Mrs. Balogun from the other side of the door. I've forgotten my goggles, so I'm just going back to the girls' changing room. You'll start your lesson when I get back. Alfie Boner joined the big swimmers this week, so you're the only beginner, which means I'll be able to give you lots of attention. The only beginner. That didn't sound like much fun. How Harrison longed to be like the other children, laughing and splashing and jumping in the big pool. Instead, he'd be on his own with Miss Balogun in the shallow pool. In the shallow pool, sinking and spluttering and swallowing a lot of water. If only he could swallow enough to drain the entire pool, then he wouldn't have to swim at all. Which is when he had an idea. After tying a bow in the drawstring of his much too big shorts so that they didn't fall down, Harrison opened the locker where he had hidden his black hole. It's definitely getting smaller, he thought to himself. There's no way it could have fitted in there last night. Shelley's grandmother was right. It needs feeding. Then he remembered Miss Balogun might return at any moment, so he had to work fast. With the black hole bobbing behind him, he swished through the footpath and into the pool area. To his left, through the glass that separated the shallow and the deep ends, he saw all the other children in his class laughing and playing in the big pool. As he watched Hector Groom, who as usual was wearing a fancy swimming cap with a number on it, ran to the end of a very bouncing diving board and belly flop into the water. Show off, thought Harrison. He looked to his right. The shallow pool was completely empty. Making sure the coast was clear, Harrison tiptoed towards the shallow pool. His black hole floated behind him. He walked down the steps into the water, guiding the black hole carefully. He was 3 steps down when he realised he made a terrible mistake. If he was in the water with a black hole touching it, he might get dragged in too, like a spider being sucked down a plug hole. Somehow, he had to find a way of getting the black hole to touch the water while he wasn't in it, which was when he spotted the lifeguard hook lying by the side of the pool. Perhaps you've seen these at the swimming pool. It's basically a long pole with a hook on the end. The idea is if someone in the pool needs help, the lifeguard can hook them to safety. And they're especially handy if you happen to be a lifeguard who doesn't like getting their clothes wet. It was the work of a moment for Harrison to tie the black hole to the end of the pole, and the work of several minutes for him to lift it at its middle, balance it on its chest like a tightrope walker, shuffle to the edge of the pool and hold it out so the black hole was suspended over the water. Finally, he tipped the pole so that the hook sank beneath the surface, pulling the black hole with it. which is when an extraordinary thing happened. As the black hole descended, the water below it rose up like a fountain, higher and higher, as if being sucked upwards, until finally it touched the edge of the hole. A split second later, there was the most enormous bang, and Harrison shut his eyes as spray showered in all directions. When he opened them again, he was completely surrounded by thick white fog. Feep! Surrounded a whistle. Harrison couldn't see a thing, but he could hear the excited chatter of children's voices. What's going on? He heard Miss Balogun shout. Harrison, are you in there? Ever so slowly the fog began to clear. The glass wall that separated the shallow pool from the big pool was filled with children's faces pressed against it. Behind them, Miss Balogun was standing with her mouth wide open at the scene before her. All the water had completely disappeared, and, standing on the wet tiles, in the middle of the empty pool was Harrison, making swimming movements. I think I'm getting the hang of this, he called out with a cheery voice, which was when his shorts fell down. Tune in tomorrow for another episode.